In this presentation, I'll explain why it's necessary to understand the context of an organization and why this requirement has been introduced into ISO 9001. I'll explain several key concepts that frame the requirements, redefining what a QMS is en route. I'll then examine the effect of these requirements on an existing QMS, identifying some new activities that will need to be carried out, and finally explain how conformity with this requirement may be demonstrated. Imagine being invited to advise each one of the following organizations on how they could improve the quality of the products and services they provide. A local agricultural society, a retail bank, a school for children, an oil and gas production company, an aircraft development and production company, a city hospital. Context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. Without the surrounding words or circumstances, it would not be fully understandable. Every one of these organizations is different. They operate in different sectors of the economy. The natural environment in which they operate is different. Their customers have different needs and expectations. Their employees possess different abilities and need different competencies. The scale and nature of the physical resources they use are quite different. The scale of their operations is vastly different. The laws governing their operations are also different. The uncertainties each face will be different, and therefore their attitude to risk will be different, and as a result their priorities will be different. The circumstances are different in every one of these situations. The context expresses what matters, the uncertainties, the variables, the expectations, the constraints. Why the change? Well, documenting what you do is not what it's about anymore. It's not about maintaining the status quo. Today's problems are caused by yesterday's solution, and we live in a connected world. Everything is connected to everything else. Therefore, actions have consequences. The change began with ISO 9001-2008. In that standard, in the introduction, it stated the design and implementation of an organization's quality management system is influenced by its business environment, changes in that environment, or risks associated with that environment. And here was a recognition, a realization that the QMS is not a closed system. So we live in a connected world. If we view the organization as if it were a system with a collection of interconnected elements that take inputs and produce outputs, the QMS does not sit on the outer edge of the organization, but is embedded within it, not as a separate entity, but as elements connected to other elements within the organization, and therefore the QMS is influenced by the same forces that influence the organization. In clause 4.1, the organization is required to determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction, and that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of its quality management system. I've highlighted several terms here because they need some further explanation. What are internal and external issues? Well, they are the factors that affect our ability to fulfill our goals, and there are two techniques we can use for identifying these factors. To identify external issues, we can use a pest analysis, and some typical topics for consideration are shown in the slide here. There will be political, economic, social, and technological factors that may affect the ability of the organization to achieve its goals. By analyzing these factors, one identifies issues that will either impede or facilitate achievement of those goals. Those factors that don't have any effect can be ignored until the next review. To identify internal issues, we can analyze the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, also known as a SWOT analysis. And again, some typical topics for consideration are shown here. The organisation will have strengths and weaknesses, and there will be threats or opportunities that will either impede or facilitate achievement of the goals. All these will need to be addressed in order to improve the chances of the organisation achieving its goals. Having identified the factors that can affect the organisation's ability to fulfil its purpose and strategic direction, the PES and SWOT analysis will reveal the relevant issues. Filtering these issues through the intended results of the QMS will reveal those issues that are relevant to the QMS. These issues will form the basis of quality objectives, which will either serve to exploit an opportunity or to mitigate a risk. The second term we need to explain is an organisation's purpose. It's rooted in what it's trying to do. Examples of which might be to make money, to heal the sick, to put a computer on everyone's desk, depending upon top management's perspective. The issues that are relevant are those that are relevant to what the organisation is trying to do. Another term is the organisation's strategic direction. A simple way of explaining this is that to imagine all the ways in which an organisation could fulfil its purpose, and of all the alternative paths it could take, the strategic direction is the path it chooses to take. Another term that we need to explain is the intended results of the QMS. They could be ISO 9000 certification, policies, objectives and processes, confidence or customer satisfaction, or might be consistent provision of products and services that meet customer and applicable legal requirements. The answer rather depends upon one's perception of what a QMS is. And so we come to the thorny question of what is a QMS. ISO 9000 defines a system as a set of interrelated or interacting elements, and therefore, taking the image we presented earlier of an organisation viewed as a system, its inputs come from the external environment and its outputs are products and services, and one of the outcomes is customer satisfaction. The elements for managing quality are those represented by the yellow blobs, which interact with other elements to produce the intended outputs. It is therefore apparent from this that we are taking a systemic view of an organisation from the perspective of how it creates and retains its customers. So how will it affect an existing QMS? Well, there will be a change in perspective from a system of documents to an open system of interacting elements. It will need to be a system that aligns with the organisation's purpose and direction rather than being a set of documents that describes what people do. This means that there needs to be a clear line of sight between the results achieved, the intended purpose and direction of the organisation, and the needs and expectations of the stakeholders. This is a most difficult balancing act and it requires constant monitoring of the critical variables. To enable this to happen, the objectives need to be soundly based, and we have two choices. We can derive the objectives using clause 4 to determine the sequence of actions. This leads us to discover business purpose and strategic direction, identify the strategic issues, determine the stakeholders needs relative to the purpose and direction, determine the scope of the QMS, and then determine the processes. However, as stated in the guide to Annex SL, there is no inherent assumption of sequence or order in which they are to be implemented by the organisation. There is no inherent demand that all activities in a specific clause must be done before activities in another clause are started. So using the standard as a template or a sequence in order to work out what to do is flawed, because it wasn't written with that purpose in mind. The process by which objectives are determined is a strategic planning process. And in this process, the activities are more likely to follow the following sequence. Clarify the purpose and direction, scan the environment, confirm who the stakeholders are, assess changes in stakeholder needs relative to the purpose and direction, confirm stakeholder success measures, identify the external and internal factors that may affect fulfillment of purpose and direction. You'll then develop a strategy, and in doing so, confirm strategic issues, undertaking situation and diagnostic analysis, another thing that's addressed by clause point 4.1. Review the guiding policy where resources will be focused, an aspect not addressed directly in the standard, and then determine actionable objectives and measures, which is addressed in clause 6.1. Having clarified the purpose and strategic direction and scanned the environment, we reveal customer needs, issues that affect our ability to satisfy those needs, and identify what is critical so we can develop a strategy for fulfilling our goals. The strategy expresses the things we are going to achieve, i.e. our objectives, and what success will look like as we achieve those objectives, i.e. the success measures. Once we have a strategy that defines objectives and measures, we can define processes, which are a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result, i.e. the objectives. What this shows is that processes are determined from an understanding of an organization's purpose and direction, the environment in which it operates, and the strategy. So how will we demonstrate conformity with the requirements of 4.1 on the context of the organization? Well, we can do that by presenting evidence that we have defined the business purpose and direction, showing how we determine who the stakeholders are, showing how we determine stakeholder needs and expectations, showing how we identify the internal and external factors, showing how we determine what's critical, showing how we determine objectives and measures, showing how the processes we have determined will deliver results consistent with the purpose and direction of the organization. So in summary, we have to change the paradigm and take a systemic view of an organization from the perspective of how it creates and retains its customers. That is the quality management system. We have to identify the critical internal and external factors and understand their effects. We have to derive our process objectives and measures from stakeholder needs and critical success factors. And we have to have a clear line of sight from results to the purpose and strategic direction. Presenting objective evidence of this will demonstrate we have understood the context of the organization. Should you have any questions, please submit them to me by email at this address. Thank you.